All right, we'll get going. Thanks for people that are on. We're going to record this per usual. We wanted to sort of uh, talk ourselves. We've been bringing on great people and sort of having different, talks with a lot of the people that we respect and work with. But we've had some questions about sort of our setup and our structure, and so wanted to just jump on and talk a little bit about that, and then obviously open for questions. So as we're going, if people want to, you can put anything in the chat or just say you have something to ask, and you can pop on and ask it. But I'm just going to give like a brief, maybe like half the time or so, overview of sort of our journey and the types of things that we do at S2 and where it has come from, what brought this team of the four of us are on today together, and then sort of open to questions, because I think, as we'll get into a little bit, the setup that we have, it's sort of, you can't replicate it exactly as is at different structures, college or whatever that is. And so sort of like talking through challenges that maybe you have faced or that you have questions about what we've done. So we actually started S2 Breakthrough, Ashley and I, in 2012 as like a side business. And so I think it's funny because I actually had kind of blocked this out of my mind, but we have always offered strength and conditioning as sort of something that we did in addition to skill training. And we used to carry like kettlebells and things in our trunks and go around suburbs of Chicago and pull them out at parks and do some strength and conditioning. And so we always knew that we wanted that strength and conditioning was something that we wanted to offer as part of S2 Breakthrough and part of our, in addition to skill. But really, that's where it sat. It was just something that you could also do. You didn't have to do it, and it sat there for a while. It's sort of like as a separate thing that we offered. Then Ashley and I opened up our facility, and it sort of was the same. We had strength and conditioning, we had strength floor, but it was just something you could also sign up for. And we knew they were connected, but I don't think we really understood it the same way. Obviously, we didn't understand it the same way we do today. And so we sort of gone through many steps as we're trying to be more efficient with our athletes and make them sort of like understand what their journey needs and what player development is. We've gone through a lot of different phases. And so after it was sort of offered separately like that, we help run a organization also, and so then we built it into their fees. And so everyone, at least in that organization, did strength and conditioning and did skill, but they still were sort of separate. At one point, someone separate from us ran our strength and conditioning. And so, as we kept asking, like, how can this be better, how can this be better, how can we more efficiently make our athletes better, we started realizing probably about this a little earlier than this time last year, that unless it's all in-house and we can sit in a room with the people sort of in charge of each of the different things that we think are important for player development, that it's going to have some inefficiencies, at least with what we're dealing with 150 athletes that come through regularly. And so we sort of started putting together a team that we thought covered the areas of struggle, basically, that we were having, which was sort of like, how do we individualize things? We're having like health issues and wellness issues. We don't have a lot of biomechanic answers in the softball world. So we want sort of like that space of someone that can sort of fill that. We want strength and conditioning to be run in-house. We want to make sure it's included so our athletes don't have the choice, because a lot of times given the choice, they prioritize skill. And so out of that came us hiring Laura, and then us hiring Carly, and sort of bringing in a team that fills different areas of what we think is important in player development, and putting us all sort of under the same roof and revamping our model. And so we'll get into it a little bit, but what it looks like for every athlete that's in our space is you can't separate out strength and conditioning from skill training at all ages. You can't separate out wellness. We do a lot of wellness things. You can't. So we've integrated all of it. And so our athletes have started understanding this year that that's what player development is. It means all of it. It's not just about doing your hitting lesson or your pitching lesson, but you do all of these different things. So with that little intro, I'm gonna kick it to Laura to talk just a little bit about our assessments. She's sort of been like taking the lead on assessments, and then not get into too many of the details. Obviously, you guys can ask what it looks like more if you're interested, but of sort of that, what that looks like, what that sort of like initial, then how we split that up into player development. So I'm gonna pass it to Laura.
Hi guys, thanks for joining us tonight. So just over a year ago now, I had a very fortunate meeting with Krista and Ashley, and I think it was sort of kismet that we were able to, have a connection and be geographically close. And they sort of plucked me from academia very willingly to join S2 and to start to lead some of these initiatives in biomechanics and health and wellness. And one of really the first things that I was tasked with was starting to put together what our player assessment process looked like. And so that took place really in August of last year. We spent a lot of time as a team going back and evaluating what we felt the key tasks were for a softball player, not a pitcher, not a hitter, just a softball player and a rotational athlete in general. And sort of took a few steps back and really try to get at the fundamental pieces that we thought needed to be included in an assessment. We had gone down the road of, sort of looking at just mobility and realized that that was really not a full, complete picture for us. And it left a lot of questions to be answered in terms of, where does this athlete fit into a strength and conditioning program? What are their skill capabilities? And so we really went back to, a couple of drawing boards in terms of developing an assessment that is, very tailored to the key things that a softball player needs. Things like pelvic control and understanding where the middle of her body is, force transfer in terms of jumping, landing, being able to generate power, speed, and these types of things that we need to evaluate and have a really good idea of where that player sits in order to have a initial conversation of what her movement profile looks like. And again, I won't go into a ton of detail about our assessment, but I'm happy to answer questions when we get to that point. But in general, our assessment covers essentially passive range of motion and active mobility. We then put together a series of exercises to evaluate pelvic control, different conditions, stable, low velocity, some jumping tasks. We're adding some power components to it starting in August. And from there, really are able to provide a clear picture of what is this athlete's movement profile. And then when we couple that with the skill evaluation, whether hitting, pitching, overhand throwing, we're able to really see how an athlete's movement profile ties with where she is in skill. And for our clients, for the parents especially, that is really an important part of the conversation to initiate training. A lot of our clients, and I'm sure if you're in the private sector, a lot of your clients seek your services because they want their daughter to become faster, they want her to pitch faster, hit further. And so the skill part really drives, why the client shows up at your door. What we really want to connect is all of this stuff in her movement profile, mobility challenges, places where strength is not appropriate, all show up in skill. And so it needs to be one big conversation. It needs to be a connected conversation. And our assessment allows us to pair those two sides of the athlete together and have a really efficient conversation with the parent and the athlete to get them to understand why, the majority of their work is really going to be in strength and conditioning and how those things then tie to skill. And I think probably the most important progress we've made and place we've made is spending a lot of time talking about pitching. Pitching has been, unfortunately, a position that hasn't evolved a ton in the last decade or so, just for whatever reason. And so spending a lot of time, and I'm going to turn this over to Ashley to talk about how our assessment has evolved through the pitching lens, I think gives a lot of indication in terms of, where we're going and where that assessment is really going to become very powerful in the future.
Unmuting myself. I didn't know if Krista was going to unmute me. Yeah, I'm going to sort of backtrack a little bit to where Krista started. We essentially, I guess, we started as a training facility. We started as, I guess, what everyone else was. And I think in our minds, we always thought we could be something better. But the reality was every time we would look at what we were actually offering, it was the same. Right? It was like a pitching lesson, a hitting lesson, and then we offered strength and conditioning, but no one did it because when no one actually, at the time, our athletes really didn't understand why that was important. And so then obviously we weren't really communicating well why that was important. So I think the steps that we've taken that Krista sort of, talked about in the beginning has really been because we wanted athletes to walk into our door and get the best experience, to really feel like, I mean, we were building gold standard. We were building the best. And so it's really been slow. I mean, 2012 obviously is 8 years ago. So it's been really slow. We've had to learn from a lot of our mistakes, but I think the changes we've made is just because we reflect and say, like, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. Having strength and conditioning, even if it's great strength and conditioning, it's standard. It's not even our, you know, our own employees. It's an outside company. It's whatever. It's not good enough. And so that's really where this process has come from. So Laura, when you asked me the question of, you know, how does it affect skill? I mean, I guess I would answer it's like, how hasn't it affected skill? I think really along this line of, and I love pitching from the bottom of my heart. I always have as an athlete and now obviously as a coach. And so I think during this process, what I sort of started to realize, maybe, I don't know, as recently as like a year and a half ago, is that the more I could sort of let go of my brain, I guess, when it came to pitching, the more I could let go of what I've always thought and have always done, the more I could sort of let myself go as far as progressing and understanding and seeing things. And so I always say, like, Krista has been really helpful in this process for me because she didn't really know anything about pitching. And so a lot of times she would ask me a question that really related to, like, to hitting, you know, something that was clearly starting in the baseball world. I think you mentioned something like, for whatever reason, pitching has not really gone anywhere because we don't get that trickle down effect that hitting has from baseball. So Krista would see something, you know, she would sort of be digging in her own, you know, the hitting space essentially, and then be asking me, you know, how that relates to pitching. And if I would be like, well, because we just do, you know, or because that's what we do. You know, I think I had a lot of answers like that. Like, it's not good enough. And so maybe what we've always done is right. It doesn't mean everything always done is the wrong way to go. But do you know that? Or is it just, well, back in, you know, 1990, whatever, that's what I was taught. So I think I started to sort of get out of my own brain, keep my gut. I think I wanted to really keep my gut feelings and what I felt like was, you know, working and didn't work and what needed to be challenged, but really kind of let go of some of the thought processes that I had in the past and just be open to kind of seeing everything. And so, I mean, when I think about a year, 2 years ago, and of course, even before, what pitching looked like it was a lesson, you know, just a lesson. Or then I was like, oh, movement's important. So grab that PVC and do some of these movements for 10 minutes. And then you're going to do all the same stuff that we did in pitching. And it really was so surface based. And I think that was my best at the time, but it was really surface based of like including movement. And so I think it's just important to talk about because, you know, like I'm glad we started there, but I'm also glad we've been open to continuing to move. And so right now, you know, we have an athlete come in and I ask first and foremost, find out, obviously, is she pre-puberty or post-puberty? I would have never asked something like that before. And that is really when an athlete walks in, the number one thing we want to know. Everything they do in our space is really, you know, starts from whether or not they're pre or post. And we don't talk about those things, not just, you know, we didn't, but really society and sports, we don't talk about those things. And so that's the first thing that I get to know. I get to look at, you know, assuming, you know, post-puberty, get to know what her data looks like. And I like to see it, obviously, particularly like her performance metrics and such. And I like to see her biomechanics and such, but really I like to get into the nitty gritty of what her movement assessment looks like, because that tells me how to coach her appropriately. So I think I really in the past have applied a cookie cutter approach. Like, we're going to do these drills because this is what you do in pitching and that's what we're doing. And so like maybe there's slight modifications, but now really for us, I have an understanding of sort of the roots of what I feel like are kind of going wrong with an athlete. Like, okay, I see all these symptoms in her motion, you know, her data shows me this. I can sort of trace it back to the root cause. And then I have to go back, you know, I go back a layer to Carly. All right, so tell me, can she do that? Can she do X? Is she strong enough in the posterior chain? Can she stabilize on one leg? Can she create, you know, hip extension? And if the answer is no, well, then I'm like, okay, so I can try to reinforce those concepts when we're in pitching. And I think a big part of my job now is to really communicate that to the athletes and put them in positions that help them see that what they're doing with Carly, like, we're going to do that same thing, but it's more pitching specific. to really be, communicate that concept. And then, but know that like it's Carly's, they have to first have that be able to achieve those things on the strength floor. And so I think like if her answer is yes, like, we've had athletes this year where I'm like, I'm looking over there and like, I see what that kid's doing over there on the floor. And there is such a gap. I mean, there's such a gap with her ability to then move like that in the pitching motion. Like, what is it? So sometimes it's like, okay, the velocity is just too fast at pitching, or, she's not able to maintain that stability or that, control at higher velocity or whatever it may be. But I think our process has just been so wonderful from an accountability standpoint. And so, there was just along the way, like, ego aside, I don't know if we ever had ego, but, if we did, is just ego out the window and really just allow the process to teach you is, I think, what I've really just sort of opened my brain and my heart up to. And so, things hold us accountable. So from data, right? So, Krista does a really great job of this, of making sure that everything that we're doing is tracked. And so put into a visual so then that we can see what's happening. So we can't just be like, see, Sally, you're getting better, And so like, says who? And so using data to then hold, the skill in check, and then the skill sort of then dumps down into strength and conditioning. Are those on the same page, kind of working back and forth, all the way into the assessment of like, are there things we need to know about that are specific about this athlete, whether it's like she needs extra work in such, in mobility of her hips, mobility T-spine. Does she need extra work in, whatever it might be, like controlling end ranges of motion through certain things? Does she have any structural issues? I think of like that process of just like it all goes hand in hand, and we're just constantly going back and forth because as we all know, like data is never linear. The journey of an athlete isn't just like, now she's better and she's even better and she's even better. I mean, that would be wonderful, but it doesn't happen. So it's just a constant back and forth of like, what has shifted, where are we missing things? And like, that's what our office is every day, is like assessing what the numbers are telling us and what athletes are telling us. Obviously we have wellness questionnaires every day for them. So getting that feedback and making sure we're just holding each other in check. So I think for me, like from a skill standpoint, specifically in pitching, I always say the pre-puberty kids, I feel like my job is to get them to fall in love with pitching and then protect them physically from pitching. It's like, don't let them pitch too much, make them have fun. And like, that's the end of the story. But for the older kids, really, it has just transformed tremendously into an entire system where I see that I am just a small piece of a much greater system. And that's certainly something that, years ago, we certainly just didn't know enough to really build.
I'm gonna cut in really quick. So I was thinking of something last year before we had brought on Laura and Carly. We Ashley and I have always pushed to sort of get all the new things and lead the way. And we're really interested in sort of like, what is the next thing? And so last year we bought Rapsodo hitting and pitching because like tech, this is where everyone's going. We got to get the tech. And so we got that, we got a blast sensor. And then we like learned the MyTPI screen, and we put 120 kids through the MyTPI screen. And then all of that, I mean, basically we were just like, what are we doing with this? I mean, we just have these things and we're telling everyone like, we're doing assessments, we have data, we have technology, and but we weren't doing anything with it. And so I think part of our process has really been to understand, like, to not have anything useless. Like, don't bring it on unless you're going to use it and unless it's going to help the process. So I think that has been really important for us. And so obviously now we use a lot of technology and a lot of data, but when we aren't using it regularly and we don't use it for either our accountability to track something, whatever it is, then it's not worth it for us. And it's not just to say you have it. And so I think we got into that when we started realizing we're missing something, like our team is not complete. I think especially when we put everyone through those assessments and then we got the results and basically we're like, what do we do with this? How am I supposed to help this athlete get glute strength? I am a hitting coach. And so like, I generally understand that, but like, this is much bigger than me. And so we need to make sure that we have someone sort of on board that can help us with that process. So I like think back to that last year, and we just started like grabbing all these things and didn't really understand how to integrate them. And that journey sort of also took us to where we are and made it look a lot different, for sure, and how we use everything. So,
Well, I
um,
think Krista, like we had to do that, right? Like that was just our way of starting somewhere. It's like, let's grab it all. And then really, because I think, I don't know, it just takes so much, takes so much like depth and time, to really get to make the changes I think that we've really been committed to making. And so, I'm glad we did those things to start, because it was like chipping away little bit by little bit. So I think we've sort of tried to learn from, we haven't had a ton of guidance inside the softball field, really. We sort of tried to find those people that we knew were on similar journeys. And I think we have found a lot from outside spaces, whether it's other sports, just generally like the LTAC community. I think we really just try to pull in like, okay, what if, let's imagine like we're reinventing the wheel. What does it look like? And then obviously like having Laura's brain and Carly's brain come into that is really where that process. So the understanding to really know, like, if I get an assessment and to look at it and I'm like, what does that tell me? I mean, is it even useful? Is it even useful? Is that slowly chip away at things until we feel like, okay, if we don't have a why to what we're doing, we don't really understand it. We either find it fast or it's gone.
Yeah, and I think it goes to what, like, when we tell an athlete, like, you gotta trust the process. This is all about, it's a process. This is a journey, whatever that is. And when they come in and the system was, whether it was their team practice or their lesson, that they just come in, they do the same thing every day. And we're like, you just got to trust it. It's going to happen at some point. If you keep working, you're going to get better. And they're like, I don't think I am. I'm just doing the same thing every day. And we're all banging our head against the wall. And so I think, this year they've really felt that. So I'm just like, give a couple examples of sort of like how things work. But our favorite example, because I always use it because it's just too powerful not to use this one, but we track regularly overhand throwing velocity is just like one of the metrics that we track regularly for all of our athletes. And so during off season, we do it about every 4 weeks. Just not that they're going to crush it every 4 weeks, but just to sort of make sure they're on track or at least sort of staying the same. And we had a high school athlete. She's a sophomore, pretty elite. And she had 2 time periods this fall or winter where she was going down, and down from sort of like any number that she had ever had. And so we started looking at this trend, and the first time that we tested, she was low, but it wasn't crazy. And it was around finals, or like, she might just be tired. We kind of looked at it, whatever. And then we did it again 4 weeks later, and she like went to the lowest that she has gone since we've been tracking for quite a while. And this is a post-puberty kid that should be on not a linear track, but at least maintaining type of track. And so what happens when something like that happens, if I can't, as a skill coach, identify like something happened with her mechanics, whatever that is, then we start diving, right? It's a puzzle of like, why is this kid regressing? What is happening here? So we do wellness questionnaires every time our athletes come in, that they talk about, have they been, did they do any outside training? Are they fatigued? Are they sore? Are they, whatever, that's a lot of questions, nutrition, sleep. So we have those. And then obviously that same athlete, along with working with me, works with Carly on the strength floor. And so we sort of like knew this athlete was one that we wanted to start having questions of, because some red flags got raised. And her questionnaire seemed normal. She didn't seem overly fatigued. I talked to her about it. She said she felt fine. But we knew we needed to dig deeper. So Carly started talking to her more on the strength floor and found out that she had been like fully into a high school strength program while she was doing our program. And so we changed that month. We totally changed her programming and changed what she did more to like active recovery in our space, and let her high school program be that main program, whether we wanted that to be the case or not. And when she tested again in 4 weeks, she threw the hardest she had ever thrown. So didn't beat the numbers when she regressed, but literally surpassed her PR. And so I think like that's what process means. And our athletes feel that. If we see something that looks weird, or they plateau, or they, whatever it is, start going down, we try to find why. What is this puzzle piece? And when it was just Ashley and I, and strength and conditioning was sort of on the side and not related, like we never would have uncovered that. It just would have been impossible for us to get to that. And so I think in my mind, like that's what player development is. It's this like, it's every athlete is a puzzle. And if we really want to maximize that athlete and understand like, how are we going to make them the best version of themselves? And not just right now, but like following their track over, if I'm a college coach, the 4 years or whatever that is, how am I going to keep making them go up? And so you have to understand all the pieces. How can I maximize their performance metrics right now? Right? Like, so how can I look at their hitting profile right now or their pitching profile right now and make them the best version, but then identify any holes they have. And then where do those holes come from? Is it a movement thing? Is it a strength and conditioning thing? Is it a injury thing? Is it, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that athletes, is it stress? I mean, it's really, there's so many things that factor into that. So just this idea now to think about what Ashley and I had even last year, but definitely like 2 or 3 years ago, is nonsense. I mean, I don't, our athletes might have got better because we have like powerful personalities and we made them like stronger, but that's probably about the only thing I could say we actually like definitely helped them with, because we were just guessing. We were just placing sort of like a cookie cutter approach on everyone. And when they hit plateaus or whatever that was, we were like, I don't know. I mean, maybe you need more reps or try harder, or like, I mean, you kind of like, you guess because you don't really know. And so I'm not saying it's so easy to find the objective answer, but we have more ideas of like the possibilities that it could come from literally 10 places. And so you got to have connections to those 10 places. So I think that's sort of like our story. What I'd like, and everyone, I was laughing, I was joking with Jake. He said like he would be on, but he's packing, because I think this is like, people are just like, I'm not putting work in to have being on video. I'm the same. When I join Zoom calls now, I'm just like, no video. I'm going PJs. But if people have questions, because one of the things that we have talked about a lot is, obviously we understand that like what the 4 of us have built at S2 cannot be sort of replicated, like taken, have those 4 people. So whether it's a college and you're dealing with strength and conditioning that has other teams, your athletic training staff that has other teams, and trying to, figure out that balance of how you integrate. You have like data you're trying to collect and use, but you've got a lot going on with games. Whether it's like a private instructor, like, I said, a lot of times private instructors, you don't have access to this. You're not in charge of hiring the people or building the player development platform. You're just a skill coach. So like, how do I start to think of this? So if people just like, you can either speak up or talk in the chat. Otherwise, you can get us going. We can talk for an hour easily. But if you have questions, just like throw them in the chat, or just say you have a question, you can talk. But I think like replicating this is something we want to just like talk and hear people's issues or what people struggle with to do this, because this is player development. I mean, this is how we're going to make softball get to the next stage, and figuring out how to integrate these different pieces, I think, is what takes our game to the next level. Ashley, you're going to say something? You look like
you seem like
chomping at the bit.
I know. Let me in there. I was just thinking about, like you said, this is player development. I think it's really to like how do we create the reason why we're thinking, okay, what are other spaces people are in? How can they create the best version of player development? Whether or not it's like they can reach this gold standard because of lack of resources or whatever limitations they may have. Because really the goal is like, how do we grow the conversation in softball about player development and get rid of this just like traditional like lesson models, silos. I was just thinking about when we had that conversation with Nate a few weeks ago, and he's like, I collect just so thousands and thousands of high school pictures and they're all mediocre, and like my heart is just like breaking, because I think, I know why. I can see like the comparison. We talk about this all the time. Like once you see, you can't unsee. The type of training, the types of things that we had done for pitchers that I felt like, I was doing for pitchers to make them so much better. You're not. I mean, I don't know, like I wasn't, like you said, I might've been like, helping to inspire them emotionally and talking to them about sort of like the inner soul of a pitcher, and all of that is so important. But when it comes to sort of their physical capability, just the traditional models, it's just not player development. I think like this year, because we obviously have the data to see it, and we have as talked about, a totally different model. We have seen we are blowing our past selves out of the water. So I hope that we can just keep growing that, because like you said, like that is how the game grows. It is. So I think really that's the goal. I mean, that's the goal of why we want all these conversations, these Zoom calls. And so in 5 years, when Nate goes back to test all those pictures, he's like, whoa, where did all these people come from? And why are they so great?
Yeah, this is a good question, actually. Carlton just asked how we can get travel orgs to begin renting training facilities or have their players go there. Like, basically, how can we replicate? We do this with an organization, and I talk about this a lot because it really, like, the bigger we get, the harder it is for even us to do, because obviously what we know with some older, more competitive travel organizations, they have kids that just come in for tournaments. They're not all practicing in the same space. When they do get together, they want to like play a scrimmage game. They don't want to do this training model. And so we have talked about this some. I think there's a couple ways it could go. I think it's interesting. Some travel organizations are starting to put someone called like the player development person in charge. I fear what that role is becoming for a lot of organizations is just like, I'm the one who tracks everything. So like, I make sure like I put their blast data together, or we just like slap sensors on them or whatever that looks like. I think that concept is interesting. So something that Ashley and I have talked about is like basically for those of you that are like following the stuff in baseball, like a role like what Eric Cressey is doing with the Yankees. Well, hopefully sometime we'll do with the Yankees. Where he's sort of like working to what their strength and conditioning department will become for MLB at the Yankees is like it holds athletic training, it holds all these different avenues, and he sort of serves as that intermediary to start that player development conversation. I think even for baseball, that was a really powerful hire because they started realizing player development was integrated also. And so I think something like that would be interesting for travel organizations. You need someone that understands the whole journey, though. So you can't just talk to the elite athletes, but someone that could help, especially these big organizations that maybe can't all train at the same place, to oversee different places where they might train or know where to send them to train like this or whatever that looks like. So I think something like that could be interesting. And then I guess my second answer is sort of the tail end of that, which would just be to build a network of places that train like this, and start to connect them so that when an athlete asks, because a lot of times they just do a training on their own, where should I go? Where am I going to get this information? That we start to have a network of, I'm not sure there's so many right now, but as they continue to grow, a network of places where they can go and get at least an understanding of these conversations. So some of the most powerful conversations we have had is people from other areas have come in and done an assessment and have totally transformed how they are training because they understand they don't train in our space, but they do remote training and they understand from the assessment like how to tackle their training more. So I just think the more conversations like that we can have, the better. And I think, yeah, I don't know if you guys have other thoughts, but I think it is difficult just based on how travel is set up right now. So we're going to have to be super creative and think of like, how can we prioritize player development when people on these teams live sometimes all over the country? I mean, really. So you have other thoughts, Ashley? No. I was going to say something. What were you talking about? Oh, player development. You were talking about something and I was thinking, I don't know, it's gone. Something about just like our journey, player development. But yeah, no, I just like always think that, I guess when we're talking, you were talking about like, are we actually, helping these kids? And if you're not doing this space, you're not. And I think just like what's happening right now is we're all trying to grab bits and pieces of it. Like our game is trying to grab bits and pieces of it. So like we'll latch on to assessments, right? But like for us, our assessments are only powerful with what they're done with after, right? So like it's really useful information for them, but then if we just like send them into the world with that and they don't understand it, or we don't then track, so at the end of each assessment report it will say like, here is what we're going to measure going forward, here is what we're going to see if you're making progress, whether that's us or you're doing it on your own. This is what you should be looking towards. And so if that's not happening, you got to start asking questions, right? And like around and around the cycle will go for us of like, it's not happening, so where's it coming from? What do we do? Like, what is this cycle coming from? And I think in my mind, like that's player development. That's how you're going to hold yourself as a coach accountable. You're going to hold the athlete accountable. And if not, it's just, like I said, we weed kids out too fast. We don't maximize kids that might actually have a really, really powerful career if we understood how to maximize them more. I was laughing today for you guys, for your team, it was Sophia who said it. But one of our kids who's going to college next year, I asked her just to write like a little testimonial about her experience this year. And so she's been with us a few years. So she's sort of seen an evolution of us, and she's been involved in different levels of training. And I thought her response was really interesting because she has seen everything. And so she said, it's given her an opportunity to reach her fullest potential while also being able to learn about my program and understand the why behind the training. Understanding why we do certain movements and exercises has helped me tremendously with applying it to softball skills, along with being able to make adjustments at practice and in game. Which, like, people on the call don't really know Sophia, but for her to say that, it's like very, I just think it's really powerful, because that is, I'm not sure we would have had athletes say things like that in the past. Like, I know how to take what I'm doing and translate it in game or whatever it is, because we were guessing. We were guessing, and so we were asking them to guess.
I think in addition to the integration and the system really have becoming so robust, I think it's also really important to talk about, like what strength and conditioning now looks like with Carly leading versus any other version of strength and conditioning that we really brought in. And I think that, in the past, and I said, years ago, it was optional and no one did it. One, because I don't really, it's 8 years ago, it wasn't popular, I guess. But still, I think there's such a misunderstanding of the purpose of strength and conditioning, what we're actually trying to get out of it. And I think even like when we felt as if we had good strength coaches, they didn't understand the softball athlete. They were not necessarily prioritizing movement quality specifically to how it relates to the softball athlete. And so it was really kind of chasing like just mass, being able to like lift heavier and to be stronger. And of course that's like, you're going to throw harder if you're stronger. Of course there's an element of that, but I think the design of strength and conditioning now has just been so incredible because it's just so much more linked to what we're doing. It's not just sort of like a traditional setup on the strength floor. And then because of that, we see young women of all ages. We have kids who are 10 doing sort of like mini PE classes in our place, up to 18-year-olds who are like thriving and loving the strength floor. And so when we are really, asking them to prioritize that and asking them to sort of see that as the root of getting better, they're like, great, because they love it over there. That has never been the case for us. And I think this year, and Carly, maybe if you want to talk about some specifics of what I'm getting at here, but the quality of strength and conditioning, and then the ability for the athletes to understand that it's not it's not torture sessions. It's not separate. It's totally related. And so like, I have athletes now that they're like coming in to work out with Carly all the time so that they have better like trunk control and pitching, and they're 15 and they understand that. So, Car, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more like specifics about what I mean when I say like, it's not really a traditional platform.
Right. So we do the foundational strength movement. So squat, push, pull, hinge, brace, but all throughout the floor, we're checking movement quality all the time. So if a kid is doing any type of row, I'm making sure that the way they are pulling is directly correlated to softball and the proper scat movement and everything. And then give the kid about a couple of weeks and they'll be able to actually teach a teammate how to do a row properly. So that's a big thing for us is the movement quality, yes, but making sure they understand that movement quality. So going forward, not only do they know how to do it, but they go and they teach a teammate and it makes it not social hour on the strength floor, but everyone's into getting better. So we're really just chasing better movers, and a byproduct of that is getting stronger.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
also like we have a check system, right? And so like we have levels. And then we have like after every so many weeks, an athlete gets assessed. And so like that's accountable for you too, right, Car? So for like, we expect this athlete to go from level 2 to level 3 in such and such time period. And we reassess and we fail XYZ. We look at her programming, what is going on. And so like we have checks within the system as well. And so I think that accountability piece is really important because like, are we generally doing enough of this? Or is this particular athlete, she needs more than what that standard program provides? We're not doing a good enough job of this. So I think like that checkpoint, and you can kind of weigh in, or Laura, that checkpoint system for us has been really great because again, it's a way to hold the system accountable, which us as coaches, but also then allows us to really just keep checking on, the individuality of our athletes.
Yeah, I think the reassessment process is really important for driving conversation that's centered around the athlete, right? To make sure that if, for whatever reason, if she does not level up, if it's mobility related, if it's, something very, very specific in her strength profile, if it's fatigue, that we are having a conversation, as a team of, where do we need to attack this from? Is this, she needs to have an injury evaluation. She needs to tweak her programming with Carly. She needs to think about, ratios between skill and strength and conditioning. I mean, it really drives a conversation that centers wholly around the athlete, which is what we should be talking about all the time, right? Is how do we work in our individual capacities to make sure that we're doing everything we can for that athlete to be healthy, to maximize her performance, to chase her performance in a safe and healthy way. And those reassessments are absolutely, they're accountability boosters for everybody, right? That the athlete's showing up in her training and her consistency, and we're tailoring the right things for her to be successful.
Well, and Laura, think about what you said. At the end of the day, like they want, if it's a pitcher, she wants pitching. And so if we have a protocol, it's like, you will not learn another pitch until you're minimally in level 2 for XYZ reasons. So, I mean, they also really want to level up, right? And so like when they don't, they're so bummed. And so then we talk about, okay, well, here's what we think we're missing. Do you see how you did this? And so I think that the systems and protocols that we've really been able to develop is also really helps with that athlete buy-in, as far as they're willing, like they want that skill piece so badly.
I was going to say too, like we seem very composed right now, but our office gets very heated. And so nicely, but we debate a lot, and we're not afraid to come at each other if we don't see a kid making progress. And so a lot of times I can think of a particular athlete that pitches, and Carly will come in and be like, she's amazing. She's the best mover ever. And she's like an example for everything. And then Ashley will be like, yeah, but she stinks in pitching right now, and she's not getting better at all. So like, your program's terrible and we need to talk about it, or whatever it is, which we don't actually mean, but we're willing to like sort of get into it with each other about like, we can't just say someone's just flying through our program if they're not actually getting better. And so we have a way, if we're tracking data at the same time, to go back and forth between that and talk about it, because you can't just say our program is great because they look great at something if they're not actually getting better, and so like we are measuring that all the time.
I want to tackle Carlton's next question, and then we've got a question from Lance too.
Yeah.
So Carlton's question was how far away softball from understanding that functional strength training, especially at young ages, is more important than playing a bunch of games. The short answer is exactly what Krista said. None of our national governing bodies, the multitude that we have, advocate for this. Other sports in the country, have an athlete development model. They have very specific criteria. USA Hockey is a great example. Lacrosse is a great example. These organizational bodies have very clear criteria for, how an athlete should progress through the sport. USA Hockey even gets into planning, practices and ensuring that practices are age appropriate, skill appropriate, and softball is light years away from that.
I think the real problem is too that, so like what Ashley mentioned, our first question is, are you pre or post puberty, right? And that dictates how we train, and we track, we're getting better at this, but one of the things that we're really trying is to track things like height and weight over like regularly, so we understand when they're hitting development and how that's going to change their training. But if we don't even ask that question, then we're very far away. if we don't understand the difference between an athlete who's pre-puberty and post-puberty, so the fact that a 10-year-old trains the same as an 18-year-old, the same as a 22-year-old, it is a problem. So I think even if we start getting a world where they play less games, we're still not training right because we don't understand what a pre-puberty kid needs and what that looks like. And so I think until we start having that conversation, we're really far. We have a couple kids who have come to us at young ages and who live elsewhere and want to train. And I think the biggest issue we run into is they play multiple sports year round. And so like us then adding functional strength on top of that is way too much. And so like, we're just entering this world where it's tricky because those same athletes are sometimes the best athletes and get pushed forward really fast. And so when they get to post-puberty, they're what we call like our red flag athletes. They got pushed really fast in skill. They were really good in skill. And so then when they're ready for a more advanced training, they get in a level 1 of us, which is like no stability, no disassociation, like the bottom, but they're throwing gas or whatever. They're really powerful. They're throwing really hard overhand. And so they're at high risk of injury. We've pushed them along a system where they didn't learn how to move. And now like their gap between skill and movement is so great that we're running into issues. So I think, that's one of our hopes is that the more we start talking openly about pre and post puberty, the more we start talking about athletes sometimes who are hitting puberty early. And then because of that, they're getting pushed through the system too fast. What happens to them when they get in that age range where they're throwing, higher than 60 pitching, but they can't move at all. They can't even have basic stability. And like, basically that's just a red flag for sort of a nightmare. And I think for you guys as college coaches, we're not talking about bad athletes. I mean, we have tested Division I athletes who fall into that category. And so for you guys in recruiting, like, don't you want to know that? And if you don't have a system in place that you can, and really, I don't know if in 4 years you could deal with this anyways, but where you can take an athlete who can't move at all and has high skill and close that gap at all, like you're sort of bringing on a recipe for disaster because that kid's going to have issues when she gets there. And so I think the more we can all start talking about this more openly, then we'll get closer to being able to close that gap because it serves your purpose at a college level too, so that you don't get these kids pushed up through your system that are coming to you and like, struggling because you might take a kid that's a little more advanced than our level 1, what we call them, and push, and then if you have some player development, you might untap something amazing in that kid. But that gap between the kids is really scary, and it should be really scary if we're talking about like a junior or senior in high school. And so I think the answer is not close, and I think it's not just softball. I think it's honestly just youth sports, and I think it's because we don't really have a system in place where they take time off and they play another sport. That's really what we're talking about with function. That's what functional strength training should be for their age. I stop and I play basketball. I stop and I play volleyball. I stop and I whatever. But because we don't have that time frame, our strength and conditioning for our young kids like tries to make them do a bunch of things to learn the movements that they're missing out on. And we just will never catch up to that because we're always going to be combating 120 games or the other sport they're in or whatever that is. So I think that's the answer. Hold on, I didn't read Lance's. Yeah. So we are one answer.
What's
to
the
this
question?
Is that
What's the question, Krista? I don't
it
know where you
says,
guys
like,
are reading the questions.
The chat. The assessment and training protocols are what our sport needs. How do we move them forward with testing at multiple levels? So like, how do we move this into different things? So one answer to that is that we're writing a book. So just to like really tease that and really make Laura feel some pressure on the timeline. It's coming out in June. And so we are going to get into a little bit of what our system looks like to help people at least understand enough to start having a conversation about replicating this. We've talked about a little, like I sort of mentioned college coaches wanting to know this information. So we have talked about like, is there a way for us to do some version of our assessment at like something like a combine so that college coaches get this information about like movement capacity with the metrics that you guys already might get at something like an on deck. So we've talked about that. So I think it's just educating people on like, the more you talk about integrations, the more in my mind, something that's just like a pure active mobility screen. It's just not going to cut it. It's not going to give you the answers that you want as coaches. And so our assessment has taken on many different layers, and we sort of when we did just like a straight up sort of not the power part of my TPI, but just or on base, but just the like mobility one. It just for us personally, it didn't answer the questions we wanted it to for skill training. And so we built more details and built on that. And so what that answers, just to give you a little brief overview for us, is that from their assessment, we get these, what we keep talking about, levels. So a level 1, this is all for post-puberty. A level 1 athlete is someone who lacks stability and disassociation at basically like any level. So they'll fail something like a side plank or a bridge or something that's pretty low velocity, and they can't sort of like stabilize their body during that. If they can stabilize under very low velocity, but they struggle to segment, disassociate, then that's where you go into level 2. And sort of like it just goes up from that. When you can stabilize and disassociate under low velocity, but not higher intensity exercises, which are all in our assessment, then you get level 3. And then our highest is a level 4 athlete. That's basically like, you're elite. Now we're going to train you for maximizing your body. We're going to try to do things like BBT and overload, underload, high intensity, everything to try to maximize what you have. And so we go, that's sort of what we did and what we wanted it to do, because we do train a lot of athletes, which I'm sure is even a college program, you guys train, you have to manage a lot of athletes. We wanted it to be able to start tiering kids in a way that's more effective. And then within that, if we see a mobility issue, that kid will get an added layer of individuality. Or, for like our level 2 athletes, because they're stable, we'll overload them a little bit. So for things like pitching, they'll throw like an overloaded plyo. But maybe that kid has really scary mechanics. And so that particular kid, we don't want to put different weights in our hands. So obviously within that, it gets individualized, but that's generally how it works. And so I think we aim to get this system out there because we think it's really efficient, and it would start the conversation a lot for you guys to be able to integrate it more into like, training protocols. So the one in June, break my heart a little bit, but it's going to be focused on pitching because we think that's where the game needs it the most. But it will talk about all of this, strength and conditioning, what our assessments look like, everything. So
I really love this question because I think we bring this up all the time. There's such a gap, like, having a great strength program, having the right assessment, it's all great. But how is it linked to what you're teaching in the game, right? And so I think this concept of like the protocols, it really is important. It's not like protocols of like specific drills, because we allow for a lot of individuality based on what an athlete needs and what she already does well and what she doesn't do well. But we have general, as you said, like protocols for, so like you don't do this in pitching or hitting until you're in this level. And here's why, right? You're unstable. Your pelvis is unstable when you're standing on 2 feet and the wind isn't even blowing, right? And so like now all of a sudden you're going high velocity pitching, it's such a highly coordinated movement, you're falling. And so no, this instability now is, of course, up through the shoulder, and there's no way you are learning a new pitch. And so I think like this link between like, how do I take an assessment and then know what she should be working on? And then one step further, I think like a lot of the conversations I'm really having with a lot of pitching coaches and really, especially at the collegiate level right now, is like, but what should I be doing with them? And so like, that's why I really love this question, is because there's still a gap. I think we're really hitting the like assessments and strength training and understanding her movement capacity. So then like making sure her training hits, is really appropriate to improve her movement capacity. But then what? Like, what do I do when she's in the bullpen? So I definitely think there's a gap. Obviously, we've been working really hard to feel like we're trying to create protocols that string all of those concepts together. But it's a gap, and I think we have to just keep working to do a better job to make that communication clear.
I got a question that just went to me, so I'm just gonna read it and I can answer it. It says, what do you do if someone can't level up at the college level? We only get 4 years, maybe 5 years. And Lance, I think this might be kind of go to your question or statement also. So I think that's why knowing where the athlete is really important. And I think the same way that you would look at, so for us, once they get to level 2, basically we reassess them every 12 weeks. And, depending on what is holding them in that level, we'll sort of predict. It's not always linear, but in our minds, are they going to be able to get out of this level by that time? Are we going to be able to move them up? What is that going to look like, depending on sort of like what we see? And so I think just like, we had a couple weeks ago, we had a pitching conversation and people were like, what are the things you see that, like, you are not changing that in the 4 years of college? I think we see that stuff in some of these things too, of like, yeah, she's a level 2 and you might think you're going to get her up, but based on why she's there, I don't know, man, if she's ever going to move up. She either, whatever it is, based on, she has a structural issue. She has I don't know, there's obviously a lot of different things that play into it, or like how far she is into that. So I think just sort of learning what is holding that athlete back. Why is she not able to do those things? It's trying to get to like the root of why she can't do that, to understand how much impact quickly you could have at the collegiate level or with us is really important for that. But I do think for the most part, if there's not a very tricky situation or something that's more glaring, if you get an athlete that's, our goal would be that our system would be better. And so by the time they get to college, everyone's a 3 or 4. I mean, that would be your ideal. And so that when you get them, you move them quickly into a way that you can start training power and quick and start maximizing them. So I think, I guess, if I was recruiting based on our system in college, I would want to know, like, what do their performance metrics look like right now? Can she make an impact quickly based on her performance metrics? That's the first thing, right? So like rep SOTO, whatever those are for people, depending on her position. And then what is her level, or however you think of that? Where is her general movement capacity? And like, how far is she, like, what is the gap? Is it really big? Because then I don't know. Is it small? So like she already has great performance metrics and I can capitalize on it because I can pull her into something really fast. And so I think we always keep in mind, like, this is a conversation we have a lot, is like, softball is not baseball. We are not talking about this like indefinite time period to make our kids better. We're talking about, we got to maximize them by 22. And so it feeds into what Carlton was saying earlier. The worse our youth system is, we only have so much time. So if they get to us as sophomores in high school and to our training platform, and they are a level 1 bad mover, we're running out of time to get them ready for you guys, to get them ready to showcase, so that then by the time they get to college, they're ready to take on, a really high level training program. And so I think sometimes when I look at like what Zach is doing at TCU for baseball and things like that, some of that is hard for us to do in softball because you guys aren't getting good enough movers to put through a program like that. And so we have to, do a better job of sort of serving up athletes that are ready for those demands. And I think when I read sort of what that athlete, Sophia, she's going to a D1 school, what she read, like, that makes me proud because she's a level 4 mover. She's our only one right now, level 4 mover. And she's going to be ready when she goes to college and understand what she needs to do to be put in a very high level program and maximize herself. And so, that
I'd like
is
to
our
comment
goal.
on that too, Krista.
Yeah.
That like our athletes are awesome. Like they love this concept, the idea of like, they're going to become a better mover. The athletes want that. It's really the constraints of the system that surrounds them, I think, that like leads them in the wrong direction. And like the discussion of like parents and this, I mean, like people, they are clinging to the right things. They do see this concept when it's communicated well. And so I just think it's a lot of the system type of stuff, and kind of going back to what you mentioned, Krista, in the last question, like the system type of stuff at the youth level. It's like, I mean, how can you do that if you got a dome tournament on January 3rd? Like, we don't have time for that, And so I think of like, when the reason why we took on the organization is to eliminate things. We're like, how old are you? No, you don't play a dome tournament on January 3rd. We eliminated those things. We kind of buffered the system to allow them to just like soak in that journey. And they want it. And so I just think like, and the parents love it. And so I just think it's really like a healthy culture. And it makes sense to everybody. And so I think a lot of times we're battling the beast of the
Right.
the politics.
I'm going to comment really
sports.
quick on Lance's just like last comment, because I think it kind of goes to our like efficient versus effective versus performance indicators, or whatever word we're going to end up using for that. But he said our challenge is that they deal with small populations. So they deal a lot more with adaptation more than elite movements. And I think a conversation that we've been having a lot, I think because of things like driveline baseball and sort of where baseball went, what softball seems to be like craving is these like very clear measurements and numbers of like, when an athlete gets within this range of degrees for external rotation as a pitcher, that's when she throws harder, or whatever that is. And so a conversation that we have had a lot in the past really few months as we sort of like clarified our program and then look to like, how do we start replicating this? How do we get this information out? Is like, what adaptations are okay because they fall somewhere within this like athlete's ability to check enough boxes to be elite. So, or to be elite or maximize yourself, I guess. And then like, when can athletes get away with inefficiencies because of their body, because they're 6'4" and, you know, can just like throw absolute gas regardless of what they do? And when can they not get away with those inefficiencies? And so that has been a conversation we've been having a lot, which I think we really need to have as a sport, because exactly that reason, when you get someone in college, it's like, what do I tackle? Do I need to tackle this? Do I not need to tackle this? Like, where is this falling in? Do I need to hit every checkpoint if I'm talking pitching? Does she need to look exactly like, you know, this? And I think we've gotten into that. And so what we've started talking about is like understanding generally the phases of each skill, and then like also understanding that, you know, an elite mover, really, because she's an elite compensator, might skip to 4 and make up for it enough to be able to be elite, you know? And so like, what does that look like in that conversation? We've been having a lot, because I mean, some of the most elite kids that we've measured as, you know, that have had come in, I'm not going to like name names, but like people that, you know, jump a foot off when they pitch, they like don't have traditional, what we would think of as like, they don't fit the standard mold, but their body, what is their body able to make up for to do that? And so that we've been having that conversation a lot, especially in pitching, just because it's really lacking in that, but in hitting too, because I think because we got so far into like measuring everything, even on the hitting side, because of baseball, we started getting like it's like we almost like found so much data that we fell back into our old routines of like, we have to hit, we have to get scapula, or, you know, retractions. Now we're going to force it. And we sort of fell back into our own old routines of these like cookie cutter approach, instead of sort of understanding actually what it means to talk about kinetic chain and that process. So this is a conversation we have a lot. And I think it will be important to keep having it of like, what are we trying to, if we're talking ground up, what are we trying to get them to do? If we're talking, it's already college, what are we trying to do to maximize that athlete in that time frame? So I don't know if Ashley, you want to talk pitching side more specifically, but I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think it's like, I don't know why we want to be so rigid. I guess it's all we know, but we really don't put enough emphasis on the variability of movement. I guess because if we are still trying to seek out like, okay, but what are the things you must do? And so I think of like, I hope we can start to have more conversations like that. We joked on a call we had last week about like, we've taken this concept of like the kinetic chain, and somehow we've now created stationary stagnant drills and calling it the kinetic chain because the hips are turned before the chest or something. But we're trying to force people in the mold. So I think it's really important to understand like what's the most efficient. And we've measured some like high level pitchers, like, oh man, they have just like really efficient. I mean, you don't see there's really not a lot of compensations or just doing things really cleanly. And so I think it's important to know that. It's important to know that because of course we're trying to maximize efficiency. Pitchers are not like hitters. We're throwing the ball, 75 to 100 plus times a game. So efficiency is key. It also, I mean, most athletes are not elite. And so you're trying to take a middle of the pack kid and maximize her. She's got to be efficient, right? And so I think that is an important conversation, but also like, I mean, we talk about crap that doesn't matter, right? And so it's like, maybe that kid shouldn't turn her toe like this. It's like, whoa, that's really far off because look at what she's able to actually accomplish for whatever reason. I mean, we've seen a lot of pitchers, I think, that have had some hypermobility, which allows them to sort of slot and create some external rotation that's almost freakish. And so the position their body's in really is not ideal, but they're able to compensate. And so, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on that Zoom call, but I think like they're separate categories. And we should have knowledge and understand both, because if you have someone that's moving pretty cleanly and isn't ingrained in anything, of course you want to build up sort of from the, most efficient. But if not, and you're kind of working your way down, it's important to understand like what matters. What do I attack? What does have to change? And what does she make up for? And we have data on
And
athletes
what
of both
can you
sides.
change? And then it goes back to like, what can you change, right? So like, I think that's like the number one takeaway. I think if I went back into the college game right now, like that would be what I want to know. What level is this kid? Is she like, what athleticism does she have, right? However you want to measure that on your own. And then like in her mechanics, the things I think she needs to do, if she doesn't do them, can I change them? Because a lot of times you can't, you know, I mean, you just can't. And some of that might tie back to their assessment. And so like the more we have assessments and the more you guys have access to that information, the better, the more you can sort of like mandate your athletes get assessments that feed you a story to understand these things, the better. But like starting to identify, like, you know, I think in pitching, we talked about if they, you know, they like have that back leg stuck in mud. And, you know, I think of some things for hitting that I think are just more difficult to change. And some of that might come from physical things that we see and limitations that they have. And some of it might come from their intent when you talk to them as a coach, right? Like, why do you do that? And if they really feel ingrained in it because of, you know, some sort of like robotic thing that they went through and were told to do that, it's hard to change that intent. It's hard to have that process. So I think that's like for us learning that's part of what we have been looking at is like, we sort of went into this. I think of this all the time. Like 2 years ago, I would see an athlete and be like, oh, that athlete could be, if she trained with me, that athlete she'd be elite. And then I was like, no, she's not, right? And why not? And like, you know, obviously some of it was the limitations of our program at the time, but some of it we came to find out that same athlete had, you know, scoliosis and inverted hips and like really feels passionate about the way she, you know, does her hitting mechanics or whatever that is. And so, you know, I think diving into that and learning where you're going to maybe run against a wall when you're trying to change an athlete is even as powerful as having player development intact once you get there. Because you got to know if your player development system is going to do anything for that athlete. And if it's not, then it's not a good recruit. It's not a good person to bring into your system. So that's all I got today. I think that was the last question. So we will post this, but feel free, like we're trying right now to be, you know, more than willing to jump on with anyone and chat about what we do and different things and, you know, sort of like dive into this. We're using this time to build our systems a little more clear and able to be replicated in things because we do feel strongly about it and really think this could take our game to the next level. Hold on one second. Let's see. Yes, I agree. Matt said if we make people more mobile, sometimes that affects their performance negatively. I think just, you know, for sure. I think understanding like also like what we mean by mobility and what that looks like a lot of times it's more about just like their ability to control themselves through that range of motion and what that looks like. But yeah, for sure. I think that's why you got to have an assessment. You know, you just have to understand like where all these things are so that you understand what you're targeting and you're not just like grabbing everyone and throwing them into the same boat. So it's really important. All right, guys.
My favorite saying of Carly's is with great mobility comes great responsibility, which means you have to be able to control it. So that question gave me a perfect opportunity to give her a shout out for that statement. I want that on a t-shirt.
Yes, that is true. That's a good one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Well, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night. We will talk soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Night.